host, Bree Franklin, and have such a wonderful conversation queued up for you all today. First of all, happy December. I can't believe we are now in the last month of 2023. What a year it's been on all fronts for TPP. Prosperity Project has checked so many boxes, and especially since we have launched Undefeated now 2 months ago in October for SLAM, Student Loan Awareness Month. We have been off into the races. We've heard from so many amazing guests so far, just in the first few weeks of season one, starting with Nika Booth, Mr. Debt Free Gonna Be. We had Tanya Menendez, the founder of Snowball Wealth. We had Tomas Alvarez, Dr. Pamela Jolly, and several others. So if you are just now catching up and tapping in with us, feel free to double back on our YouTube channel and get caught up to speed and see some of our earlier conversations. Today, we are going to be discussing good debt grievances. So this is a topic that is a very, very sore spot for a lot of student loan holders, myself included. This is a very loaded and I would say highly charged up term. So we're going to get into a very rich dialogue about perhaps why not to use that phrasing moving forward. Of course, I know as with many things, it's always usually well intended, but you're going to hear the extraordinary story of someone who has overcome her own massive debt hurdle, right? And been able to achieve tremendous success. However, knowing that that came at a significant price. So I will read off a quick blurb, but I think her incredible story speaks for itself, and it's easier to show you than I can tell you. So joining us today, we have Caitlin Boston, who is a writer, director, and producer currently living in New York City. A transracial adoptee from South Korea raised in Northern Maryland, Caitlin graduated with a BA from the University of Maryland with a focus on critical race theory and media studies, and then earned her master's in philosophy and social psychology from the University of Cambridge in England. In 2019, Caitlin wrote, directed, and edited a viral short film, Student Loan Payoff Celebration, which told the story of her 10-year journey paying off more than $222,000 in student loans, which garnered more than 900,000. So we'll just go ahead and round that up to a million views on YouTube. And as I said, this story is absolutely better off showcased than told. So I'm going to play you all a little bit of a snippet and you can see exactly what I'm talking about when I say this woman is top tier.
Than just financial obstacles.
I do my hair toss, check my nails. Baby, how you feeling?
Caitlin Boston is feeling good, all right. Yeah, she's wearing a purple spandex catsuit and a Korean wedding crown. Maybe you would too if you paid off more than $200,000 in student debt on your own.
I really wanted to figure out a way to express what I wanted the next phase of my life to be like, right? That wasn't about debt in any sense, that it was about, celebration and gratitude and joy.
Her celebration video going viral on YouTube. The video is carefree now, but it was a very long road to get here.
My payment was more than I could bear to pay at the time, and I called my dad in a panic. He said, I can't help you, we can't help you. I think that I felt so ashamed in that instance, just because I felt like I should never have had to ask in the first place.
Incredible story indeed. So without further ado, so excited to welcome Caitlin onto Undefeated. Glad to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Bree. I love the Prosperity Project so much, so I'm just so happy to be here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy that we finally had the chance to do this. I think I approached you like 2 years ago. We were still in our very early starting out phase, and we were supposed to do an Instagram live, and then life just had other plans. That was like the beginning of about a year and a half of a transition period for me. So glad that once we finally had the full shebang with this show, that you were able to come on and just bring your incredible story to our audience. So if you would, obviously you and I have had many sidebars. Please do share your story of surpassing that ridiculous debt load of $222K.
It's really nice being able to reflect after the fact, having paid it off. But yes, that was a 10-year journey for sure, starting off when I graduated from grad school in 2009 to when I paid it off in 2019. And I paid it off on my father's birthday in August. And
kind of as a final tribute and gift to him. But that was probably, I would never wish that journey or experience on anyone. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the topic of today's chat really resonated with me, just this idea of, what is good debt? Just because I was the first person in my family to go to college. I was definitely the first person in my family to go to grad school and have a passport. And I went to grad school overseas. And so that, came with different costs, when we had to do the calculations for adjusting to the pound as opposed to the dollar, right after the financial crisis of 2008. And I think that coming out, being the first person from my family to go to school, there wasn't really a great path laid out for how do you get a white collar job. I think it was just expected that you get a college degree and suddenly, any office will have you kind of thing, because that was literally the distance that my family had from that type of labor. So I had to, having had no real prior work experience in a white collar setting, I had to do paid internships. And I was very privileged to get paid internships at the time as opposed to unpaid. But I did find them in DC. And then I worked in nonprofits. I did work doing community and political organizing, labor organizing, healthcare policy. And then I made the transition to tech. And it was during that transition that I made some very valuable female relationships. And I kind of came into my own in terms of advocating for myself in relationship to salary and just overall career progression. And so that's what allowed me eventually to pay off my student loans. And I think that there are a couple of things that are notable along that all those trials and errors as I was figuring things out. But one was that you're allowed to negotiate for yourself. Two, that, you really should be doing it in community. This is much easier when you're doing with other people, particularly other women of color. And then I don't like to emphasize this quite so much, but I do think it is very helpful, if not essential at times, to have white male allies help, just because of salary transparency. And they do tend to be the highest paid in the room or in any institution. So when you can anchor yourself against those salaries, you know that you're going to be better paid.
Right.
And three, making sure that you're passing on what you're learning to other people. So I think that if I hadn't had the access to different conversations, different relationships over that journey that taught me things that I might not have found if I hadn't been told, how to search for certain things online or how to do certain types of research, I don't think I'd be here today, or I would have been here maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now. But yeah, so that's, I think, my journey in a nutshell. It's learning a lot of different lessons and having to learn what is frugality versus what is too frugal in terms of being able to account for some of the things that I think could put more pressure on you later on. But yeah, 222,000, all said and done, started off as 140,000. And then because student loans are totally usurious, all that interest just really makes you question, is it worth it? Was it worth it? Yes. And only, I'd say in certain times, certain contexts.
Right. It's situational, 1,000%. And I feel like this whole narrative, right, where people just use blanket statement language like that, oh, but it's good debt. I've literally seen people, they will give whole presentations and they will put it in a column and act like it is by itself. And they'll say, okay, yeah, bad debt is payday loans or certain credit cards or store cards or whatever, but they put student debt in the good column. And to me, it just is very tone deaf, because we're not certified therapists, but what we do through TPP, this is a form of healing and rehabilitation going on. When we bring in Prosperettes who are debt constrained, and for them, student debt has done nothing but upend their livelihood and take away their financial security and stability. So when I hear it, I have to be very mindful to not just unleash on people. I'm like, all right, I'm going to put my therapy to training and not bite your head off and give you the benefit of the doubt. But I'd be so curious to hear if you have heard that singled out in that way, and just what your typical response is. And if you've had dialogue with people when they've used it, maybe while meeting, maybe not, and how that's gone.
Whew, yes. How many times have I had to bite my tongue in the past when I've heard that phrase being used, especially as the first person in my family to go to school? I think that phrase was tossed around a lot, and I definitely internalized it. And I think the first couple of years that I was carrying a $1,200 a month student loan payment, when I was taking home, I think it was $2,200 at the time. And that's not accounting for rent. That's not accounting for any of my living expenses, right? That's just my debt was over half my take-home pay. That was something that would cause me some shame to think that, but this was supposed to be good debt, so why is it so hard for me to live in a way that I feel like I can take care of all my bills and I can afford to eat healthy food and I can afford to put gas in the car, kind of thing. So I think that the context for student loan debt is the idea of it being good debt. I think that just comes from a previous era where, housing loans were approximate to your salary and were not designed to put you into, a lifelong vice. And I think it also comes along from an era and a generation where a college degree really was a stepping stone to the middle class, from if your family were immigrants, if they were lower resourced, under-resourced, and it was almost a guarantee to a middle class income. I think that when we think about it now, we have to recontextualize it with all the other factors that come into play with higher education, right? So I think that I definitely fell into this trap because I went to a grad school that had a little bit of a name brand. And I think the idea is that, this name brand will definitely follow you for the rest of your life. And, it'll cost out over time. If you could have told me that when I was looking at my pay stubs and I literally knew I had $200 to last me the rest of the month for food, after all my bills were paid, after my rent was paid, after my student loans were paid, I would have eaten that brand name for something that would have been more affordable, right? And I think that now when we think about if it's good debt or not, I think it's how much debt is it, right? What's the total cost? What's the interest rate on it? How exploitative is it? Because if it's over 4%, right, then that is not doing you any favors in the long run. And you're going to be carrying that graduation debt and that graduation present, for the next potentially 30 years, if not longer, if you're able to discharge it, you're paying it off or other means. And so I think that's one of the things that has to come into the conversation. So when I say recontextualize it, it's asking, what do you think you can make salary-wise based on what your degree is and what your long-term interests are? And then how much are you willing to have that cost your future self, right? When we think about what that's going to look like from you realistically, are you going to be able to have help from your parents? I mean, let's get down to brass tacks, because if that's not a factor that you can include there, then I think that's also something that has to kind of come in when we're thinking about it, if it's going to be okay to carry. Because that's a part of the lifestyle constraints and just the life constraints period that I think people don't know is going to matter when they actually have to pay those loans back. So yes, you might have a degree, but what can that degree get you in terms of a salary, in terms of equity, in terms of your ability to build on it? I do think I think because I'm at the age now where a lot of my friends are starting to have kids, so we're having this conversation more regularly, but it comes up a lot that if my kids, like my friends' kids, I just want them to the best education, et cetera, et cetera. And I sit around and some of my friends who are the most successful, they went to state colleges, they went to community colleges, they became entrepreneurs, they hustled their way out to now, multi-7-figure business lines that they operate, right? By figuring out their own connections, their own spaces, their own areas of opportunity, without having the name brand degree that hypothetically taken them to the next level. They made their own level, right? And I think and they weren't constrained from the start by having significant debt to hold them back. So I think that that's one of the things that we need to really think about now when we talk about student loans is what's the opportunity cost to your future, not just what is it setting you up for in the immediate. Yeah.
That is superb advice. Yes, think the long-term game. And I have to also make sure that I call out the fact that a lot of young people would have no problem with that, but where things get tricky is the parental influence. And I mean, hearing you mention that in your case, that was a big thing for me, right? Not wanting to disappoint mom and dad, not wanting to leave, right, a black mark on the family tree. For me, I wasn't first in college, I was first in Ivy. And so that was really lauded in my family on both sides of just, like the first to ever do it at this level. I cannot tell you the number of times people said verbatim, oh, with a Dartmouth degree, you'll be able to write your own ticket in the job market. And at 18, you just trust that because you're thinking, yeah, usually that's how it goes. If you want to quote unquote be someone in life, you go to the top school. And for me to not do that, I perceived as leaving potential on the table and falling short of my potential. And again, I just truly didn't know any better financially. I didn't learn the term debt constraint until 3 months ago. I went to a conference in Chicago and one of the speakers mentioned it. And it was just this whole euphoria of like, okay, that's who we're trying to help here. But it's having the vocabulary for it, right? If you're going to be able to address the problem, you have to know what to call the problem. And something that I would really caution people against, again, in the spirit of inviting people in and getting them to start seeing things in a different perspective, I would just ask you to lovingly consider anyone who watches this and they might feel, like a little bit on the offensive or defensive, you know what I mean? But just to consider that language, and instead of branding it as blanket good debt or bad debt, it's about the experience, because the same form of debt or amount of debt can have total opposite experiences. Like if someone has $800 in credit card debt and they make $800,000 a year, it's like completely inconsequential. But that $800, if this person is unemployed and they're making, barely above minimum wage, that's a different conversation. And student debt too. Asahi Pompey, who is the president of the Goldman Sachs Foundation, we've worked a great deal with her through our involvement in 1 Million Black Women Initiative. And she and I had a few sidebars, and she talked about her law school debt, and how in her case it was pretty much benign because she went and made great money, and the system worked how it was supposed to for her. And so that's how it should always be, except it's not a given. And there's so much gray area now. And like you touched on too, when a system is predicated upon exploitation as opposed to empowerment, this is the outcome you're going to get 10 times out of 10. You're going to see people who fall through the cracks, where it backfires, where it blows up catastrophically in their face, and then leaves them, as we've said, debt constrained. So in getting really, the spirit of being transparent and vulnerable, I would ask, and if you don't feel comfortable answering, totally understand, but was there kind of like a peak or a rock bottom moment where you were just like this is a boa constrictor and it's draining the life out of me and I don't know how I'm going to continue on? And I guess just what was the moment that allowed you to finally dig deep and decide, I'm going to transcend this. I'm not going to throw in the towel. I'm not going to just concede and say, you know what, screw it. Y'all are just going to have this over me for the rest of my life. What kicked you into action?
That's a great question. I think that it was right after I moved to New York, actually. And what had happened is I had really kind of resigned myself to my student loans because it seemed so impossible, right, to pay them off. And I think that because my family wasn't the most financially fluent, and because I had kind of looked at my career and thought, I'm going to choose a career in service, working in nonprofits and doing community organizing, political organizing, labor organizing, that I really had accepted the idea that I was going to make the bare minimum I could to pay my bills, to pay my loans, and that I shouldn't try to ascend for more.
Mm.
And what happened is that my dad committed suicide, and while he had no help in me paying off my loans or anything of that sort, or supporting me financially, my family and I, haven't been financially involved like that since I graduated from high school. But the fallout from that was that, when I was 28, I was in deep grief, like profound depression, trying to reckon with such a huge loss. And I mean, all grief is enormous. I think suicide is particularly challenging to reckon with, but I realized I couldn't take time off of work. So I had exhausted my vacation days and my sick time, which was 3 to 4 weeks. And then I had to go back to work. And it wasn't an option for me to not work. And again, because I didn't have family support, I didn't have anyone I could stay with, I had enough savings to cover me for about 4 months, 4, maybe 5 months. And then I was done. And because this was right after 2008 and the financial collapse, I think that everyone around that time was really on edge about being able to stay employed long term. And the idea of being underemployed, I think, has, really hindered my generation coming up, just because so many people ended up having to take jobs that were not related to their college degrees, right, as a source of survival. So it was in that period of about 6 months to a year after he had passed that I lost a lot of weight. I couldn't sleep. I was really a mess. And I realized I had to stay a top performer in order to be employed. And I didn't have a choice. And I think that the feeling of the loss of that agency made me so profoundly enraged. It's the only feeling that could match the grief I was in, to be perfectly honest. And not at my institution that I was working with, not at my coworkers, but just at the situation that because I owed $1,200 a month in a student loan payment, that I was past my forbearances, I was past my deferments, and I'd already gone into further debt because I'd used those in the past. I decided that, what? My dad is gone. I have serious bills to pay and I can't take time off. And I am so many different types of a mess right now that I decided I was going to get a new job. I was going to look outside the career path that I'd already chosen and look for something a little bit more lucrative. And that's kind of what made me realize, oh, I can make more money, one, or I can have a different choice, right? I can make a different choice and have a different path through this. And then it was only once I officially stepped into a couple of different roles and realized the ceiling now had suddenly exploded for me in terms of compensation. And I learned that through conversations with my female coworkers, my female of color coworkers, my white male coworkers, that I really took ownership over this idea that I had a different destiny. I could make a different destiny for myself. And I think that was, my therapist calls it, she calls it like grief transformation that people can have, where you experience one of the lowest moments of your life and you figure out a way through that pain and through that process to take yourself to a different place, essentially. And I think that's what happened for me for sure, but it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been confronted with the fact that I couldn't take the time I needed to grieve and properly process the loss. So capitalism ruined my grieving process. And I think the fact that I say that, right, the fact that that's possible, that you actually can't appropriately mourn the loss of your loved one because you don't have the ability to step back, because if you do, you lose your healthcare, you lose your job, you lose your housing. I think that really reframed the type of life I wanted for myself, or the types of opportunities I wanted to give for myself. So that's what I would say was my lowest moment, then coupled with my moment of transformation through that process.
Jeez. So I remembered hearing about that, and because it had been such a while, like what stayed with me all this time was just the highlights, right, of your story, and like, okay, we have a success story, who's done it, who's overcome it. That's a terrible loss, to have incurred. And again, just my heart and condolences go out to you. Looks like you've done a brilliant job of getting back on your feet and resuming that healing journey and really taking the time to unpack it and fully just do everything you needed to be there for yourself and to take time. And I completely relate. And I was on someone else's show last night, and I shared, the story is similar in the sense of feeling great loss and just being compounded by being debt constrained. So for me, it wasn't a matter of a death, but, losing a very meaningful personal relationship. The partner I was with off and on, we had a good 5.5 year run this most recent time. And absolutely, there are a number of things, right, that needed to be worked on. But I would say, sort of like at the crux of it, the overarching issue was absolutely my debt constraint, because that spilled over. It had domino effects into my mental stability, my ability to contribute, right, as an equal partner and just cover basics. And especially when you're not married and it's kind of forcing you, like we locked down during quarantine together. And so it's just like, okay, seeking shelter, seeking refuge, like all the wrong reasons, right, to take that big of a step with someone. So absolutely, I feel your pain 1,000%. And I'm just so, again, inspired and in awe that you've been able to turn things around, come out on the other side, because I think there's a lot of people who will see this, who you're going to give them hope. And, because in their case, they might think, oh gosh, my $80,000, there's no hope for me. My 180,000. In your case, your principal is around like the 130 threshold. And then in totality, you pay almost another 100K on top of that. So, to just talk on the practical side, right? You've talked about the career pivots, but on like a day-to-day money management basis, were there any tools or things that you implemented to keep you on track? Because I think in the same way that you can't just abstractly say, I want to just, you know, improve my health or improve my body fat percentage or whatever. You have to have numbers, you have to have targets. In business, right? You know, we got KPIs. So what were those benchmarks and tools that you use to stay on target and make sure that, you know, you did have a concrete plan you could follow?
Oh, I think that I'm a real big believer in just an old-fashioned spreadsheet budget. I hate paying for things. I never had Mint. I just don't like the idea of paying someone to manage my money for me in that particular fashion. So I still live or die by spreadsheet budgets. So just to understand what's coming and what's going out, right?
Mhm.
Because you can't manage what you don't track.
Right.
So I think that even when I was, again, living on, very, very little income compared to my debt, I always, always, always spent time on a daily basis. I still do this, tracking all of my spending across all my different line items, right? And obviously, my budget has been able to expand mostly in the health category and things like therapy or acupuncture, since I paid off my loans. But you know, the line items have grown as the debt has decreased. But I still do this just as a good practice to help keep myself on track with things. But once I started actually making a more meaningful salary and had a higher compensation package, one of the first things I did was I really tried to figure out first I consolidated my loans because I had two loans that were causing me an extreme amount of like poorly wrought stress with over 9% interest, right? And so they were probably the biggest burdens in that baggage to bear. And once I had consolidated all of that debt together, I had combined my federal loans, so I had very low interest rates alongside my private loans. But I did that just because I wanted to be able to pay off huge chunks at a time. I didn't really want to have to worry about managing it across all the different lenders that I had because the private lenders were an absolute beast.
Yeah.
The next step was figuring out, okay, if this is I was earning equity. So if this is my equity earning schedule, this is when I'm going to start paying off my loans. And this is how much I'm going to be putting towards my loans. And this is how much I'm also going to be putting towards my tax payments, right? Because my tax burden increased. So
Mm.
that was a simultaneous strategy that I had to navigate. And something I would redo is I would put some more money into a retirement account simultaneously. But I was really so focused on just paying off my loans that's all I was really looking at. I was really tunnel vision about it. But still, I think that being able to track literally, this is when I'm going to make this payment for this amount of money for this percentage of my debt, I think one made it easier for me to maintain momentum when I was on that process. And then once, I started seeing sizable amounts just, dissipate, then I just started planning out, okay, this is my final payment date. It's going to be on my dad's birthday.
Mm.
And to get there, I'm going to need to pay off, X amount of dollars each month until I get to, I think the final payment was only $70 even. It wasn't even anything particularly
Wow.
special because I'd taken out so much. Because once you start getting into that habit of, oh, I'll give it, let's say like, $25, I think a part of if you're a goal-oriented person, a part of you's like, well, what if I threw $50 at it? You start getting excited by seeing your own progress. So I think that I was watching my own graphs kind of rewrite themselves, and that was very exciting. And so I think that that was one of the things that really helped to incentivize me. I'm only a mammal. Seeing a real nice visual is something that keeps you going in your lower moments. You're like, I would actually really like to go out to eat tonight. It's like, no, I'd really like to hit my goal on my planned timeline. So
Mm.
those are all things that I would stress, any kind of tracker. You don't need to do your own spreadsheets. That's very manual. But now I also have just a regular portfolio tracker that I have as well. I use Personal Capital. My partner uses, what does he use? Oh man, I can't mention it because I can't remember it, but he has his own system that works better for him. And I think that being able just to see everything all consolidated in one place, we still manage a debt-free household. So that's, by choice and by effort. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I think if anyone can start maintaining that practice and making sure that they can see what they're spending on, how that's affecting their debt or not affecting their debt, I think that's really essential in being able to get through it.
Mm. Yes. I mean, and it's that easy, which I think a lot of people want. They think it has to be so complicated. They think it's like the financial equivalent of tracking macros, where it's like, okay, if I'm putting X percentage, it's just like, keep it simple. Have something where you can have that reflected back to you. Like you said, you can't change what you won't face. and just being accountable. I would even throw in there having an accountability partner. So I've found one, and we'll have her on a future episode. I can't wait. But I think just reinforcing and having that can do attitude that, believe it or not, goes such a long way, because a lot of these things can be self fulfilling prophecies, right? So I know we're coming up on time. These are always such juicy conversations. I never want them to stop. But if you could just share with the audience a closing advice and action, parting tidbit, what would that be?
I think the thing that I always like to share with folks is we're taught to be ashamed of debt, right? We're definitely taught to be ashamed to talk about money and debt. But I think that one of the things that has really helped me in my journey is sharing everything I'm experiencing from the time where I was truly living in a very, like debt constrained lifestyle to where I am now, even because you end up learning a lot from other people who are either in similar situations, who have faced similar situations, or have a different perspective that they're willing to share what they know. And I think that particularly when I was going through my debt payoff journey, you find so many people who have no ability to empathize for you. So again, you have to take the good with the bad. But people who have gone through something similar, I had been told a lot of reasons why I shouldn't consolidate, why I should consolidate. And I felt like I had enough research at that point that I'd done on my own and book learning or, online, and then also talking to people and hearing their personal experiences that made me really reconsider it and made me realize that was the right choice for me and how I like to pay off debt. And then once I, was able to diminish my debt, get rid of my debt, and now I'm in a situation where I'm doing more wealth management.
Mhm.
I think that one of the biggest opportunities that I've found in doing that is I've heard probably almost 100 different strategies at this point for how people like to manage their money. And that's from, just day-to-day budgets to, multi-million dollar portfolios. And I think that my willingness to talk about it and to ask questions and to tell people what I'm doing or how I'm thinking about things, that opens up the opportunity for other people to feel vulnerable or feel confident sharing with you what they're doing. And I think being a woman of color, especially who does not come from a family who's financially fluent, it's really only done nothing but benefit me to learn how other people are thinking about their finances. And I think I end up learning all these little tidbits that I never would have considered before and that I never even would have known about, even if I hadn't known to go, ask this person about how they're just doing this thing because they have a niche interest in, X, Y, or Z, or they have a situation that might mirror mine. So I would say that don't feel ashamed to the point that it blocks your ability to have conversations with people that could help you one way
Mm.
or another. Even if it's just sharing your story. I think that while I was going through the process, I would hear people go, I've never gone through this, but I actually know someone who's in something similar. And the fact that you're tackling this is really interesting because I think that they're really mired in feeling the 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 paucity of being in this type of debt. And I think my response to that would always be, "Oh, wow, I really hope they feel less alone," because I definitely feel less alone knowing that they're out there too. So, yeah.
That's beautifully put. If I'm going to piggyback onto that, I guess my Briism, I always like to interject my own little 2 cents for each episode. Mine would be, don't just dig holes, make sure you're planting seeds. So I think, just the work ethic that you touched on, making strategic moves, because a lot of people confuse motion with action. Just having been in this boat too. And so far I'm 40K out of the hole, but I still got a decent way to go until I'm on the other side of it completely like you. But just absolutely corroborating everything you shared. Thanking you again from the bottom of my heart for making time to be our guest. I know that when we were initially going to have this conversation, we ran into some hiccups, and you also got by the viruses that are going around this winter. So just glad that you were able to get some R&R, are feeling better. Thank you again for just sharing your story and continuing to keep the spirit of overcoming alive. You've got, so much more exciting stuff ahead of you, and I can't wait to keep following your journey. So just again, on behalf of our entire community, thank you.
Now, I love the Prosperity Project so much. I think you guys are amazing. I think watching you receive flowers, right, and all your accolades, they're so well deserved. I think you're such an example of calling people in and really doing something that champions your community. So I just think that, Bree, you're just amazing. And I just love everything you've built. And every time I see anything that you've earned for your community, I do like a silent dance for you. I truly do.
Thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you because yeah, I'm already crafting fun ideas for how I'm going to celebrate. Like the world will know when I finally do. So many people are like, "Oh wow, like you're, they assume that I'm out of it." And I'm like, "No, not yet." But yeah, when that day does come, I will definitely be pulling some cues from you in the purple spandex.
Sweetest day, the most well-deserved day though. It'll be the most well-deserved.
Amen. Well, it's such a pleasure, Caitlin. Thank you again, and I'm sure we'll be having you back again soon, maybe even for another live taping that we do. Just can't wait to keep talking on this and inspiring, and for our community to learn from your amazing example.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I hope you have a great holiday season.
Thank you. Right back at you.